My name is Ahmed, and for as long as I can remember, my life revolved around Islam. I was born into a devout family where faith wasn't just a part of our routine, it was the very foundation of our existence. Every day, 5 times without fail, I bowed in prayer, reciting the sacred verses of the Quran with deep reverence. The mosque was more than a place of worship. It was my sanctuary, my source of guidance and peace. My devotion to Allah was unwavering, and I took immense pride in walking the straight path, believing that my obedience to the teachings of Islam would ultimately lead me to eternal salvation. My understanding of life, purpose, and morality was shaped entirely by the Quran and the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad. I immersed myself in the hadiths, memorized key surahs, and sought wisdom from scholars who dedicated their lives to interpreting the scriptures. There was a rhythm to my existence, a certainty that came from believing I was fulfilling my divine purpose. Every act of worship, every moment of discipline reinforced my conviction that I was on the right path, the path that led to Allah's favor. Yet, despite my deep devotion, there were moments, quiet, fleeting moments, where questions would creep into my mind. Late at night, when the world was silent and my thoughts had nowhere to hide, I would find myself wondering, was I truly doing enough? The Quran spoke of deeds being weighed on the day of judgment, but what if my good deeds fell short? What if, despite my prayers and efforts, I was still unworthy in the eyes of Allah? These thoughts never lasted long. I always buried them under more prayer, more study, but no matter how much I suppressed them, they never truly disappeared. I had always been curious about other religions, particularly Christianity. As a student of theology, I found it fascinating to compare beliefs, but I never wavered in my conviction that Islam held the ultimate truth. To me, Christianity was flawed. Its doctrines, especially the idea of Jesus as the Son of God, seemed illogical. Jesus was a prophet, highly respected, but still just a man like the others who came before him. The concept of the Trinity felt contradictory, and the idea of salvation through grace alone seemed like a shortcut, dismissing the responsibility of personal effort and righteous deeds. For years, I held tightly to these beliefs, engaging in debates with Christians whenever the opportunity arose. I was confident in my arguments, ready to challenge their scriptures with passages from the Quran. I saw it as my duty to defend Islam, to expose what I perceived as contradictions in the Bible. My faith felt unshakable, and I took pride in my ability to articulate its truths with clarity and conviction. Yet, beneath my certainty, those quiet doubts still lingered, unspoken, unresolved, waiting for a moment when I could no longer ignore them. Everything changed during a trip to visit my family in another city. The day had started like any other. I woke early for Fajr prayer, whispered my usual supplications, and spent the morning in theological discussions with my younger brother. But by the afternoon, a strange discomfort settled in my chest. At first, I ignored it, dismissing it as nothing more than fatigue or indigestion. By evening, however, the discomfort had turned into a sharp, searing pain that made it difficult to breathe. "Ahmed, we're going to the hospital," my brother said, his voice firm as he grabbed his car keys. I waved him off, reluctant. "It's nothing. I just need to rest." But the pain didn't subside. By the time we arrived at the emergency room, I could barely stand. The doctors rushed to my side, their faces growing more serious with every test they ran. Within an hour, I was lying in a hospital bed, surrounded by machines as they delivered the news. I was having a heart attack. The words hit me like a hammer. A heart attack at my age? It didn't make sense. I had always taken care of my body, eating well, exercising, staying disciplined in my faith. I had done everything right, so why was this happening? As the doctors worked frantically around me, I felt a wave of fear, unlike anything I had ever known. I thought of my family. I thought of the prayers I had yet to offer. Was this how my life would end? Had I done enough? Would my deeds be sufficient when weighed on the scales of judgment? The pain in my chest grew unbearable, and my vision blurred. I could hear the machines beeping wildly, the voices of the medical staff fading in and out. Panic gripped me, and I clung to the one thing I had always believed would save me. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa Allah, wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulallah. I repeated the words over and over, desperate to affirm my faith in what I had always known. But as the darkness swallowed me, a strange sensation took hold, one that I couldn't explain. It felt as though something, or someone, was waiting for me beyond the void. When I opened my eyes, or at least I thought I did, I wasn't in my body anymore. It was the strangest sensation, like floating weightlessly in the air. Below me, I could see my own body lying motionless on the hospital bed, surrounded by frantic doctors and nurses. Machines beeped erratically, their alarms blending with the worried voices around me. My brother stood nearby, his face pale with fear, gripping a chair so tightly that his knuckles turned white. I should have felt panic. I should have been desperate to return to my body, but instead I felt an eerie calm, as if I were merely an observer in someone else's story. I tried to speak, to call out, to tell my brother that I was still here, but no sound came. In fact, I wasn't even sure I had a mouth or a voice in this form. I felt detached from everything I had ever known, as if I existed in a space between two realities. What is happening? I thought, my mind racing. Am I dead? The idea sent a shiver through me. I had spent my entire life believing that after death, the soul would face immediate judgment, weighed against its deeds. But this wasn't what I had imagined. There were no angels, no familiar visions of the afterlife I had studied. And then I saw it, a light. Not just any light, it was unlike anything I had ever witnessed. It wasn't blinding, yet it carried an intensity that pierced through me, as if it could see straight into my soul. It pulsed, alive, radiant with a presence I couldn't ignore, and then it began to pull me in. At first I resisted. Every instinct told me to stay rooted in the reality I knew, to fight against whatever was happening. But the light had an undeniable pull, not like a force dragging me, but like a call, a beckoning that reached deep into the core of my being. It wasn't just something to be seen, it was something to be felt. The warmth of it enveloped me, not in a physical sense, but in a way that touched something deeper than flesh. It carried a presence, one that radiated peace, yet held a power beyond comprehension. As I moved closer, the sounds of the hospital room began to fade. The beeping machines, the hurried voices of doctors, even the sight of my own body, they all blurred into the background until they disappeared completely. For the first time, I felt weightless, free. Yet, I wasn't alone. A figure emerged from the brilliance of the light. At first, I could barely make out the details, but as he stepped forward, clarity washed over me. He was unlike anyone I had ever seen, radiating authority and compassion in equal measure. His presence filled the space around us with an overwhelming sense of love, a love so pure, so unshakable, that I felt completely exposed before it, yet not condemned. And then he spoke. Ahmed. The sound of my name sent a tremor through me. His voice carried no judgment, only a deep, knowing kindness. "Who are you?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. He gazed at me with eyes that seemed to see straight through me, into my thoughts, my fears, my soul. "I am Jesus." The words hit me like a thunderclap. I stared at him, my mind racing. Jesus? It didn't make sense. It couldn't make sense. I had spent my entire life believing that Jesus was nothing more than a prophet. A great prophet, yes, but still just a man. The idea that he could be anything more had always seemed impossible, even blasphemous. And yet here he was, standing before me, more real than anything I had ever known. "No, this isn't possible," I whispered, shaking my head. "You're just a prophet. You're not who they say you are." Jesus didn't argue. He didn't rebuke me. He simply looked at me with eyes that held infinite patience and understanding. "You have searched for the truth, Ahmed," he said, his voice calm, steady. "And now you have found it. I wanted to protest, to challenge him the way I had debated Christians in the past. But before I could speak, something changed. The light around us shifted, and suddenly I wasn't just standing before Jesus anymore. I was seeing something. Scenes unfolded before my eyes, vivid, full of life, as though I had been transported to another time, another reality. I saw him, Jesus, walking among the people, healing the sick, restoring sight to the blind, even raising the dead. I had read about these miracles in the Quran, but now I was witnessing them firsthand. The compassion in his touch, the authority in his words. It was unlike anything I had ever imagined. And then the scenes began to change. I saw moments I didn't recognize, not from the Quran, but from the Bible. I saw Jesus at the Last Supper, speaking to his disciples with a love so deep, it transcended human understanding. I saw him in the Garden of Gethsemane, praying with an anguish that made my heart ache. And then I saw the crucifixion. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. The scene before me was brutal, more painful than anything I had ever imagined. I saw the nails driven into his hands, the crown of thorns pressed into his forehead, the agony etched into his face. Blood stained his body, dripping onto the wooden beams of the cross. But what struck me the most wasn't the suffering. It was his eyes. Even in the midst of unspeakable pain, his eyes held something I couldn't comprehend. Love, not anger, not resentment, but love, a love so powerful, so undeserved, that it left me breathless. I had always believed that God was merciful, that he judged with justice. But this was different. This wasn't just justice. This was sacrifice. Why? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Why are you letting this happen to you? Jesus turned his gaze toward me, his voice gentle yet firm. For you. The words pierced through me. For you, and for all who will receive me. Tears filled my eyes. I had spent my whole life believing that salvation had to be earned, that my good deeds had to outweigh my sins, that I had to strive and struggle to be worthy of paradise. But here was Jesus, willingly taking the punishment upon himself, not because I deserved it, but because he loved me. The weight of that realization crushed me. The cross, the sacrifice, the suffering. It wasn't just a historical event. It wasn't just a story. It was for me. The vision shifted again. The brutal scene of the crucifixion faded, replaced by something even more astonishing. I saw an empty tomb. At first, I didn't understand. The massive stone that had once sealed it was rolled away, and inside there was no body. Only grave cloths, neatly folded, as if left behind deliberately. And then Jesus stood before me again, but this time he was radiant, alive, whole. The wounds on his hands and feet remained, but they no longer bled. Instead, they shone with a brilliance that was beyond human comprehension. He was no longer suffering, he was victorious. Death could not hold me, he said, his voice filled with authority. I have overcome the grave, and through me you can have life, true life. I trembled. Everything I had believed up until this moment was unraveling. The Quran had spoken of Jesus as a prophet, a messenger. But what I was witnessing was far beyond prophecy. This was power. This was resurrection. How could I have been so blind? I whispered, falling to my knees. Jesus knelt beside me, his hand reaching out, not to condemn me, but to lift me up. You were searching, Ahmed, he said gently, and now you have found the truth. Tears streamed down my face. I'd spent my entire life striving, praying, and hoping that one day I would be good enough for God's mercy. But here was Jesus, offering it freely, not because I had earned it, not because I was worthy, but because he was. The light around us pulsed with warmth, filling me with a peace I had never known. But before I could speak, the vision changed once more. Suddenly, I was no longer surrounded by light. Darkness, thick, oppressive, suffocating. The warmth I had felt moments ago vanished, replaced by a chilling emptiness that made my very soul tremble. I turned, searching for Jesus, but he was no longer beside me. Instead, I saw figures in the distance, countless shadows, wandering aimlessly in the abyss. And then I heard it, weeping. Not the kind of weeping that comes from physical pain, but something deeper, something more final. It was the sound of regret. I watched as these souls reached out, searching, desperate for something, for someone, but there was nothing. No light, no peace, only endless longing, endless separation. "This is hell," Jesus' voice echoed around me, though I could no longer see him. "Not a place of fire and torment as you have imagined, but a place apart from me, a place where my presence does not dwell. This is what it means to be separated from God." The horror of that realization hit me like a tidal wave. Hell wasn't just punishment. It was absence, an eternity without hope, without love, without God. "No," I whispered, stepping back. "I don't want this. I don't want to be here." "You don't have to be." Jesus' voice came again, gentle yet firm. "But many choose it, not because I desire it, but because they reject the gift I have given." I felt the weight of his words. Hell wasn't just a punishment for the wicked, it was the natural consequence of rejecting him. And suddenly I knew this was the fate I had been headed toward. Despite all my prayers, all my efforts, I had been trying to earn something that had already been freely given. The choice was mine now. Stay in the darkness or step into the light. The darkness pressed in around me, suffocating, heavy with a sorrow I could barely comprehend. The distant cries of those trapped in separation from God echoed in my ears, and for the first time I truly understood what it meant to be lost. I turned, desperate to escape, searching for the light I had seen before. "Jesus," I cried out, "please don't leave me here." And in an instant, he was there. The darkness recoiled at his presence, shrinking away as if unable to withstand the radiance of his light. His warmth surrounded me once more, and I felt something lift from my soul, something heavy, something I had carried all my life. Fear, doubt, the burden of trying to be good enough. Jesus reached out his hand, his eyes filled with a compassion that pierced me to my core. "Come with me, Ahmed," he said. "There is more for you to see." I didn't hesitate. I reached for him, grasping his hand, and the moment our hands touched, the darkness vanished. I was free. The light engulfed me again, but this time I wasn't afraid. I welcomed it. I embraced it, and as it surrounded me, I felt something I had never known before. Not just peace, not just relief. A love so deep, so boundless, that it filled every empty space inside me. I had spent my life searching for God, and now, in the presence of Jesus, I had found him. The light around us pulsed gently, as though alive, wrapping me in a warmth that reached deeper than my body, straight into my soul. I wasn't just standing in the presence of Jesus, I was standing in the presence of truth itself. For so long I had thought that my faith, my deeds, my prayers, and my discipline would be enough to bring me into God's favor. But now, standing before Jesus, I saw the truth clearly. It was never about what I could do. It was about what he had already done. He had taken the punishment I deserved. He had paid the price I could never pay. And now, he was offering me something I had spent my entire life striving for but had never truly grasped. Grace. Not something to be earned, not something to be achieved, but something to be received. "Do you understand now, Ahmed?" Jesus asked, his voice gentle yet firm. I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "Yes," I whispered. "I see it now." For years I had debated against this very idea. I had dismissed it as foolishness, but here, in the presence of Jesus, it was undeniable. Salvation wasn't about tipping the scales in my favor. Salvation was a gift, paid for by Jesus himself. And in that moment I knew I had a choice to make. "Ahmed," Jesus said, stepping closer, "will you accept my gift? Will you trust me?" The answer was no longer difficult. I had spent my whole life searching for the way to God, and now I had found him. With a trembling voice, I spoke the words that would change my life forever. "Yes, Jesus, I trust you." The moment I spoke those words, something inside me shifted, like a chain I hadn't even realized I was wearing, suddenly shattered. A weight lifted from my soul, a burden I had carried my entire life without knowing it. The light around me grew even brighter, but instead of overwhelming me, it filled me. It was as if I had been walking in darkness my entire life and had only now, for the first time, stepped into the fullness of truth. I looked into Jesus' eyes, and for the first time, I didn't feel the need to question, to debate, to prove myself. I was seen, I was known, and yet I was completely loved. Jesus reached out and placed a hand on my shoulder. "There is more for you to do," he said. "Your time here is not finished." I frowned, confused. "What do you mean? I don't want to leave. I want to stay with you." He smiled, a warmth radiating from his expression. "You will one day, but for now you must go back. You must tell them what you have seen." Go back? The thought sent a wave of fear through me. How could I return to my old life after this? How could I explain what had happened? What would my family think? My friends? "They won't believe me," I admitted. "Some won't," Jesus said, "but some will, and you are not alone. I will be with you always." The light around us pulsed again, and I felt myself being drawn backward. The warmth of his presence remained, but I knew I was being sent back. "Go, Ahmed," Jesus said, his voice strong yet gentle. "Tell them what you have seen. Tell them the truth." The light exploded around me, and in an instant I woke up. Gasping for air, I jolted upright in my hospital bed. The harsh fluorescent lights replaced the brilliance of the divine glow I had just left behind. My chest ached, my body felt weak, but I was alive. The machines around me beeped wildly, and I could hear the frantic voices of doctors and nurses rushing to my side. Someone gripped my hand tightly. "Ahmed!" I turned my head. It was my brother. His face was pale, his eyes filled with tears, both from relief and confusion. "You're alive," he whispered, his voice trembling. I swallowed hard, trying to process what had just happened. It hadn't been a dream. It wasn't some hallucination. It was real. I had been with Jesus. I had seen heaven. I had seen hell. And now I was back. Tears filled my eyes as emotions flooded over me. I wanted to speak, to tell my brother everything, but my throat was dry and my body felt drained. The doctors were speaking in hushed voices, marveling at my sudden recovery. "It's incredible," one of them muttered. "We thought we'd lost him." "It's a miracle," another said. I closed my eyes briefly, still feeling the lingering warmth of Jesus' presence. It was a miracle, but I knew this miracle wasn't just for me. Jesus had sent me back for a reason. And now I had a choice. Would I keep this to myself, or would I obey his call and share the truth? For the first few hours, I barely spoke. My body was still weak, my mind overwhelmed by everything I had just experienced. My family hovered over me, relieved yet cautious, as if afraid I might slip away again. But inside, a storm was raging. How could I explain what had just happened? How could I tell my family, the people who had raised me in unwavering devotion to Islam, that I had met Jesus, that everything I thought I knew had been turned upside down? Would they even listen? Would they still accept me? As night fell and the hospital grew quiet, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. My brother sat nearby, keeping watch, his concern still evident in his eyes. "You scared us, Ahmed," he said softly. "We thought we lost you." I hesitated, my heart pounding. This was it. This was the moment. "I need to tell you something," I said, my voice hoarse. He looked at me, waiting. I took a deep breath. While I was gone, something happened. I went somewhere. I saw something. His expression shifted, his brows furrowing. "What do you mean?" I swallowed hard, my hands trembling slightly. "I saw heaven. I saw hell. And I met Jesus." The moment the words left my mouth, I saw the shock in his eyes. Silence hung between us. "Then what?" His voice was quiet, disbelieving. "Jesus spoke to me," I continued, my voice steady despite my fear. "He showed me things I never understood before. He told me the truth about God, about salvation. And brother, he is more than just a prophet." My brother pulled back slightly, as if trying to process what I was saying. "Ahmed, you're weak. You've been through a lot. Maybe your mind is just—" "No," I interrupted, shaking my head. "It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a vision. It was real. I was there, and now I know Jesus is the way to God. His face darkened, his hands tightening into fists. Do you even realize what you're saying? I did, and I knew what it could cost me. But I also knew I couldn't stay silent. Jesus had given me a mission, and this was just the beginning. My brother's face was a storm of emotions, disbelief, anger, confusion. I could see the war raging within him, the clash between the love he had for me and the weight of the words I had just spoken. "Ahmed," he said slowly, his voice almost pleading, "do you even understand what this means? What you're saying?" I nodded. "I do." "No, you don't." He stood up abruptly, running a hand through his hair. "You're talking about Jesus, the way Christians do. You're saying things that—" He stopped, shaking his head, as if refusing to let the thought settle. "I know this is hard to hear," I said gently, "but I can't deny what I saw. I was there, I saw heaven, I saw hell, and I stood before Jesus himself." His fists clenched at his sides. "You were unconscious. Your mind was under stress. Maybe it was a hallucination." "It wasn't," I interrupted firmly. "You know me. You know how much I have studied theology, how much I've defended our faith. Do you think I would just abandon everything because of a dream? This wasn't a dream, brother. It was real. And deep down, I think you know it too." His eyes flickered with something. "Doubt, maybe fear." "If what you're saying is true," he whispered, "then everything we've believed, everything our family has lived for, it's not enough." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "It's not about it being enough or not," I said. "It's about what's true, and Jesus is the truth." A heavy silence fell between us. Then he took a step back. I need to think." And without another word, he turned and walked out of the hospital room, leaving me alone with the weight of what had just happened. I had spoken the truth, and now there was no turning back. As the door closed behind my brother, I let out a slow, shaky breath. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on me. I had spoken the truth, but at what cost? Would my family reject me? Would I lose everyone I loved? Doubt tried to creep in, whispering fear into my heart. But then, in the stillness of that hospital room, I felt something else. Peace. A deep, unshakable peace that didn't come from my circumstances, but from the presence of the one who had sent me back. I remembered Jesus' words, "I will be with you always." I wasn't alone. Even if my family turned away, even if the world rejected me, Jesus would never leave me. That truth anchored me, strengthened me. I didn't know what lay ahead. I didn't know how my family, my friends, or my community would react when they learned what I now believed. But I did know one thing. I had been sent back for a reason, and no matter the cost, I would not stay silent. I would share the truth, because now I had seen it with my own eyes, and it had changed me forever. The days that followed were a blur of recovery and quiet reflection. My body was healing, but my soul had already been transformed. Every time I closed my eyes, I could still see him, Jesus, standing in the light, calling me to share the truth. But the weight of that truth was heavy. I had spent my entire life surrounded by people who saw Christianity as a distortion of faith, a misguided belief built on falsehoods, and now I was one of them, a follower of Jesus. I knew the cost of speaking openly, rejection, anger, maybe worse. But could I really stay silent? No. Jesus had given me a mission, and I would not turn away from it. So I started small. I began reading the Bible in secret, comparing it to what I had known from the Quran. The words of Jesus leapt off the pages, not just as teachings, but as life itself. Every verse I read confirmed what I had seen. Every word echoed the truth he had shown me. And then I took the next step. I reached out to someone I trusted, Hassan, my closest friend, the one who had always been by my side in faith. If anyone would listen, it would be him, or at least that's what I hoped. Hassan and I met at a quiet cafe, a place where we had often discussed theology and debated religious ideas. This time, however, the conversation would be different. I stirred my tea absent-mindedly, my heart pounding. How could I begin? How could I tell him that everything I had once believed, everything we had defended together, had been shaken to its core? He sensed my hesitation. "Ahmed, what's going on? Ever since your hospital stay, you've been different." I took a deep breath. "Something happened to me, Hassan. Something I never expected." He leaned in, intrigued but cautious. "What do you mean?" I hesitated, then finally said it. "I saw Jesus." His eyes widened, a flicker of disbelief crossing his face. "Jesus? You mean, like in a dream?" "No," I said firmly. "It wasn't a dream. I was out of my body. I saw heaven. I saw hell. And I stood before Jesus himself." His expression shifted, part skepticism, part concern. "Ahmed, you were in critical condition. Your mind was under stress. Maybe—" "No," I interrupted, shaking my head. "You know me, Hassan. You know how deeply I've studied Islam. Do you think I would just throw everything away because of a hallucination? I met him, I spoke with him, and I know now Jesus is more than just a prophet. He is the way to God." The weight of my words hung between us. Hassan exhaled sharply, leaning back. "Do you realize what you're saying? If anyone hears this—" He lowered his voice. "This could destroy you." I nodded. "I know." "Then why say it?" he asked, his voice almost pleading. I looked at him, my heart steady. "Because it's the truth." Hassan shook his head, exhaling in frustration. "This isn't like you, Ahmed. You've always been logical, thoughtful. Now you're telling me you believe Jesus is, what, the Son of God?" I met his gaze without hesitation. "Yes." He scoffed, running a hand down his face. "That doesn't make sense. You know the arguments against it. You've made them yourself. How can God have a son? How can one man's sacrifice forgive sins?" I leaned forward, my voice calm but unwavering. "That's exactly what I thought, until I met him. Until I saw his love, his power, his sacrifice. Hassan, I stood before Jesus, and I knew he is the way to God. He didn't just claim to show the way. He is the way." Hassan's jaw tightened. He wanted to dismiss me, to argue, to reason his way out of this. But I could see the conflict in his eyes. "And what about everything we've been taught?" he challenged. "What about the Quran, the prophets? The way of life we've followed since birth?" "I don't reject any of it," I said, "but I now see it in a way I never did before. Everything we believed was leading to this moment, to Jesus. He isn't just a prophet, Hassan. He is the fulfillment of everything God promised." He looked away, silent. I let the words settle. "I'm not asking you to accept this blindly," I said, "but don't turn away from the truth just because it scares you. I know it's hard. I fought it too. But Hassan, what if I'm right? What if Jesus really is who he says he is?" He clenched his jaw. "I don't know." His voice was barely above a whisper. I reached out, gripping his hand. "Then ask. Seek him the way I did. If you truly want the truth, he will show you." Hassan didn't reply. He simply stared at the table, deep in thought, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes that I hadn't expected. Not anger, not rejection, but doubt. And doubt was the first step towards searching. Hassan didn't say much after that. He finished his tea in silence, his mind clearly wrestling with everything I had just told him. I didn't push him. I knew this wasn't something he could accept in an instant. When we finally stood to leave, he hesitated before speaking. "Ahmed, I need time." I nodded. "I understand." He looked at me for a long moment, as if seeing me for the first time. "You really believe this, don't you?" I didn't waver. "With all my heart." Hassan exhaled slowly. "Then I have to think. I have to figure this out." "I'll be here," I assured him, "and so will he." He didn't answer, but he didn't walk away in anger either. As I watched him leave, a strange sense of peace settled over me. I had no idea where this conversation would lead, but I knew one thing. A seed had been planted, and it wasn't just in Hassan. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt a new certainty growing inside me. This was just the beginning. I had been sent back for a reason, not just to believe, but to share, no matter what it cost me, no matter who walked away. I had seen the truth, and I would spend the rest of my life making sure others saw it too. The days that followed were filled with quiet reflection and prayer. I knew that sharing my experience wouldn't be easy, and that some would reject me outright, but the call Jesus had placed on my life was undeniable. So, I started small. I met with others in my community, friends, mentors, people I had studied theology with for years. I approached each conversation with patience, knowing that what I had to say would challenge everything they believed. Some listened with curiosity. Others responded with anger. A few dismissed me entirely. "You've been deceived, Ahmed," one scholar told me, shaking his head. "You're letting emotion cloud your reason." "I thought that too," I replied, "until I stood before him, until I saw what I saw. If this was just emotion, it wouldn't change me like this. I can't deny the truth." But not everyone walked away. A few, just a few, asked questions. What exactly did he say? What was it like to stand in his presence? Do you really believe Jesus is more than a prophet? And with each question, a door opened. I wasn't here to argue. I wasn't here to tear anyone down. I was here to share what I had been shown, to let others see the love, grace, and truth I had encountered in Jesus. I knew this was only the beginning. The road ahead would be difficult, but I wasn't afraid, because I wasn't alone. Jesus was with me, just as he promised. As I continued sharing my story, I noticed something unexpected. People were listening. Not everyone agreed. Many argued. Some even avoided me altogether. But there were those who couldn't ignore what I was saying. They saw the change in me, the conviction in my voice, the peace in my heart. And some, just a few, began to ask, not in anger, not to debate, but out of genuine curiosity. "Tell me again, Ahmed. What did Jesus say? How did you feel when you were with him? Could it really be true?" These weren't questions of rejection. These were questions of searching. I knew that some would walk away, but I also knew this: the truth has a way of finding those who truly seek it. And as I spoke, as I shared, I realized something else. I wasn't just telling my story, I was telling his story. The story of a love so deep, so relentless, that it reached across time, across culture, across my very understanding of God, to rescue me, to rescue all of us. I didn't have all the answers. I didn't know how my journey would unfold, but I knew this. I would never stop sharing, because Jesus had saved me, and now it was my turn to lead others to him. As the days turned into weeks, my mission became clear. I wasn't here to argue. I wasn't here to force anyone to believe. I was here to plant seeds, to tell the truth as I had seen it, to show people the love, the grace, the freedom that Jesus had given me. Some would reject it, some would walk away, some would even turn against me, but some wouldn't. Some would hear my words and feel that same stirring in their souls, the same pull toward the light that had drawn me in when I was standing in the presence of Jesus. And for them, I would keep going. For them, I would speak. For them, I would share, no matter the cost, because I had been sent back for a reason, and I would not waste the second chance Jesus had given me. So if you're listening to this now, if you feel that stirring in your heart, if you've ever wondered if there's more, seek him. Ask him to show you the truth, because I promise you, if you truly seek him, you will find him, just like I did, and it will change your life forever. Thank you for listening to my story. If this message has touched you, if you have questions, if you need prayer, leave a comment below. And if you want to hear more stories like mine, check out the videos on your screen now, because this isn't just my story, it's his, and it's only the beginning.